the way from Oregon. We have one final, and then we'll go to the panel. We're going to bring forth now Congressperson Eric Swalwell, all the way from the 15th District of California. We are the National Action Network, and they're coming from all over the nation. Welcome, the Congressman.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Swalwell. I represent a district in Northern California, and I want to thank Reverend Dow. I also want to thank Reverend Jackson. You have really burned a path for the next generation of activists as they have picked themselves up from the struggle and the tragedies they go through. They don't have to look very far to know how to do it, because we have on this stage leaders who have done it and continue to do it every single day, and it is a blessing to be here with each and every one of you. I want to thank you too, because with your footsteps, your phone calls, your door knocks, what you did in this last election, when you marched from the town squares and you marched on the town halls, and as Dr. King called upon everyone to do, you marched on the ballot boxes. Well, NAN, we cut our time in hell in half. We won the House. We won the House of Representatives. And it may seem dark. It may seem dark, but at the last State of the Union, Speaker Pelosi was sitting behind Donald Trump this time. That's because of what you did. So I'm not pessimistic at all. I believe the sun is beginning to rise again in America, and it's because of your activism. So in 2 years, we will protect against further cuts to health care. We'll protect from taking more and more money from every floor and every building so that it goes to the top floor. That's not happening anymore. We're going to protect against corruption. But I submit to you that if we get this right, if we keep the House, if we win the Senate, and we put a Democrat in the White House, we don't have to be on defense. We can go on offense. And here's what offense looks like. It's bringing the promise of America to all Americans. The promise is a simple one, but it hasn't been fulfilled enough for enough people. If you work hard in this country, no matter who you are, what you look like, who you pray to, what your parents did, or who you love, your hard work adds up to doing better for yourself and dreaming bigger for your kids. It's been broken for too many communities. I saw it work for my family. My grandfather was a mechanic. My dad, a cop. My mom, she made dollhouses in our garage, baked wedding cakes in the kitchen, sold them to the community, and our living room had a very large but probably unlicensed daycare facility. Kids just running around everywhere. But they had a simple dream, that if they worked hard enough, their son could be the first in the family to go to college. And they expected that I would work as hard as they did. I was born in Iowa. They moved us to Oregon, up and down California. When I was age 9, they put me to work on a paper route because they wanted me to value hard work. And for the first time in my life at age 9, I saw that promise of America was not reaching every American. On my paper route, 6 a.m. in the morning, I would see there were big houses on my route and there were small ones. There were houses that had 2 new cars and houses that had none. In some houses, I rode my bike right by because they didn't get the newspaper at all. And on Sunday mornings, I'd circle the real estate listings, put in front of my parents' homes that I hoped that we could move into so they could realize the American dream of homeownership. They kept working hard. They kept digging deep. They sacrificed religiously. And when I was 14 years old, they were able to buy their own home, root us in a community, and put me in a good school district. I went to college on a soccer scholarship, went to law school back east, and came back home to work as a prosecutor in Oakland, California. My dad was proud. His son was working in a courtroom to do what he had done in the streets, seek to bring justice. But I saw in that courtroom promise of America not reaching every American. I would sit in West Oakland apartment buildings. I would talk to witnesses of homicides. Too often, young black men who had seen their young black friends murdered in the streets, and we never read about their names in the newspaper. And with the piercing sounds of police sirens outside, the payday lenders in the liquor stores across the streets, and I'd hear about the crumbling schools with the best technology was an overhead projector. I knew it didn't matter how smart that young man was. It didn't matter how hard he worked. It wasn't going to add up to anything unless we believed in this community, invested in this community, and gave him a chance. I got elected to Congress at age 31. When you go there as a 31-year-old, you're put on the IT help desk. They're like setting up Facebook and Snapchat accounts. But I thought there were some other youngsters in our group, like Hakeem Jeffries and Grace Mang from Queens, and we wanted to get across the country, listen to this next generation of Americans, understand what their concerns are, what their struggle is. So I started a group called Future Forum. Went to 50 cities across the country. I saw this next generation of Americans in the quicksand of student loan debt and the black community. 89% of black students come out of college with student debt. That's 25% higher than white students. Hollowed out communities where the best exports are people who go away to college but never come back because the jobs are leaving where they grew up. I saw that promise of America on a paper route in a courthouse across the country as a congressman, not reaching all Americans. How do we fix it? NAN, I propose that it's time in America, with our leadership, we go big on the issues we take on, be bold with the solutions we offer, and do good, again, in the way that we govern. Go big, be bold, do good. When it comes to healthcare, once and for all, we need coverage for all. It says if you're sick, you're seen. And you don't go broke because of it. To me, that means a public option, but not just letting the healthcare debate stop right there, but investing in cures in our lifetime. Instead of $1.6 trillion, where 83% of the benefits go to 1% of the persons, what if we took half that money and looked every cancer, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's patient in the eye and told them, you know what? We're going to invest in your hope, your cures. For too many communities, the healthcare plan is a GoFundMe page. Or as I've seen in supermarkets and gas stations, a hollowed out candy jar with a flyer and a picture of someone's face. And their best chance at hope is that you're going to dig into your pocket and put some change in that bucket. The charity of strangers. We're too rich of a country, too caring of a people for that to be our health care plan. When it comes to education, I propose that we turn on the head the model in America that a child's future is determined by his or her zip code. We should build modern schools in every community and dedicate and commit federal funding for that. And when it comes to student debt, I'm still paying off just under $100,000 of it. So are 40 million other young people. I propose this. If you work through college and you come out, take your first job, but also volunteer to serve a community in need, you get a debt-free education. If you work for college, college should work for you. And for the 40 million with student debt, college should leave you with memories and long-time life lessons, not a lifetime of debt. 0 interest on student loans. Government should make a single penny on the back of our students. And if employers want to contribute to student loan debt, they should be able to do that tax-free. Go big, be bold, do good. It's also time that once and for all in Washington, our leaders make ending gun violence a front burner, top tier priority. I want to tell you about a young man named Gary Jackson. I prosecuted his murderer. No one read about him in the paper, no one knows the story. But he was murdered in Oakland, California when someone fired 40 rounds from an assault weapon at him. He was hit just once. And his mom asked me in the witness waiting room before she testified, she said, "Eric, I don't get it. If you're going to get shot by a firearm, wouldn't you hope that you get hit in the arm or the leg? Not with an assault weapon." The autopsy doctor testified that when an assault weapon is fired at you, one round is enough because of the sheer energy and velocity. Her son didn't have a chance. And I've listened to the kids, the students in the classroom, who picked themselves up after the tragedy in Parkland, and they marched too. They beat 17 NRA endorsed candidates. So, they are telling us this: their right to learn without fear, their mom's right to hug them when they come home from class, your right to have a barbecue on your street and not have it riddled by gunfire, the right to pray at a church, worship at a synagogue, go to your mosque, dance at a concert, shop at the mall, all of those rights to live and to love are greater than any other right in the Constitution. That should be the most important right. That should be the first right. So going big and being bold means banning and buying back the 15 million assault weapons that are on the streets of America. It means having background checks for every firearm purchase. It means investing in community-oriented policing and gang violence prevention programs, so that we're not just thinking about when the suburbs have a mass shooting, we're thinking about the shootings that happen in our streets. And the First Step Act was very much needed for prison reform. But I'll tell you, that should have been the last thing we did. It should have been called the Last Step Act. Because if we get this right, we invest in communities first, in education, in health care, in child care tax credits. So that the last thing, the last option, the last policy that we put forward would be sending someone to prison. We should be believing in their God-given potential. That's the first act. That's the first step. Go big, be bold, do good. Bring that promise of America to all Americans. Scrub out of our democracy the dirty maps and the dirty money that keep your voices silenced and these issues from getting a vote. And when it comes to our national security, going big and being bold and doing good means remembering who our friends are in the world. The next president of the United States is going to have to go on a global affirmation tour. Remind our friends all over the globe. Because if you're looking at the foreign policy landscape in America like a parent looks at a playground, this is what you see. Your child over the last 3 years has gone from hanging out with the honor roll kids, the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Australians, to now we roll with the detention crew. The Russians and the Saudis and the Turks. And that's going to cost you more. If we don't have our allies, if we can't rely on them, that's going to take tablets from your kids' hands in their classrooms and medicine from our seniors. And the next president of the United States should immediately host a climate summit in the United States to put us back into an international climate accord. We're going to protect what has had a wrecking ball taken to it. We're going to protect what Franklin Roosevelt called the four freedoms: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from fear, and the freedom from want. The press declared the enemy of the American people, a Muslim man in a country whose symbol is the Statue of Liberty. Medicare being raided to pay for those tax cuts. And it should really be the freedom from fear-mongering, because you're told to fear new scaravans every single week at our southern border because they don't look like us. Let's restore those 4 freedoms. But let's go so big, be so bold, and do such good that we add a 5th freedom. A uniquely American freedom. The freedom to dream. The dream that my parents dreamed for me when they believed that if they worked hard enough, their son could be the first in the family to go to college. The dream that every one of you dreams for your kids. That if they are free to learn, free from violence, free from discrimination, free to vote. And for some 9-year-old this morning who rode her bicycle around, freezing her little face off, looking at the biggest house on the block and believing if she works hard enough, we still live in a country where that hard work would allow her to live in that house, then you're free to dream. That's the promise of America. Let's link arms and make sure it reaches every American. Thank you so much.
Ask that you remain with us. We only have a few more minutes to go ahead and tell the panelists, but we're going to go through this. Instead of me going to tell you who the panelists are, we're going to begin with Bishop Proctor. He will introduce himself, and then we'll do it from our seats. We'll go through the presentations. We have one question about what this is all about. You may not have heard of a program called Black Church 50. Some white evangelical churches decided after the election of Barack Obama that their goal was going to be the registration and turnout of 50% of the white vote in those churches. It worked. So we have something called Black Church 75. And we're going to turn out 75% of the black vote in these churches. So Bishop Proctor, if you would introduce yourself and then take these 5 minutes to make this presentation. We say goodbye to say we'll see you in a few minutes to Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr. Give him a hand clap of praise.
It certainly is appropriate to recognize the giants among us and to continue to pray and salute the Jackson family. Let me also give a shout out to the 80 Zionites who pressed their way to be here to be supportive. Thank you, I appreciate it very kindly. My name is Dennis Proctor. I'm a bishop of the 80 Zion Church, and I've been asked to focus on the black church and in particular on our redefinition. Nelson Rivers had a wonderful quote. He said, "A black church is not a church full of black people." I think that is significant for us to understand in this day and time. It's very significant now because the black church is no longer the church of primary advocacy. We have had an unusual season that is seeing an exodus of what Du Bois called the talented 10. The great among us have now found it necessary to leave what was known as the historic black church because they want to be more palatable to society. It's not accidental that we talk about the Reverend Al Sharpton, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Nelson Rivers, because it was the black church that produced the prophetic voice. However, with the attack on Jeremiah Wright, the prophetic voice has been assassinated. to a large extent. Young Jamal Bryant was talking the other night, said the black prophetic voice has laryngitis. The distinction is, if they could assassinate or annihilate the voice of a Jeremiah Wright with the sanctioning of the state in the office of president, then come back and get some lesser lights, like Tamika Mallory of this organization, who would not disavow Louis Farrakhan, or Twitter that would take Bishop Talbot Swan, who was on this panel last year, off of Twitter because of his uncompromising view. Those voices become the voices that represent the black church. The black church that is committed to what Jesus talked about in Luke 4, preaching to the poor, healing the oppressed, recovery of sight to the blind, set at liberty them that are bound, incarcerated, and imprisoned with poverty. So the challenge today for the black church, as I see it, is that we must redefine how we communicate with those millennials and those who are the foot soldiers of the movement. Jesse Jackson was a youth when they sat in Greensboro at the lunch counter. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Abernathy, youth, young millennials, when they led a movement. So what must the black church do? We must learn to speak in tongues. Not glossolalia, but to speak a language that connects with a society that we must connect with. We must understand that there is a difference between Nipsey Russell and Nipsey Hussle. We must understand what Nicki Minaj was saying by bringing her name into the forefront for Minaj. We have to understand that we have to connect before we can direct, before we can perfect, or before we can correct this next generation. When we use terms like souls to the polls and take 5, that message, that language works for those who see voting as a sacred privilege. This next generation doesn't have the sacred privilege concept. So we must change the narrative so we can connect. How do we connect? Alfred Street Baptist Church has learned to connect Howard John Wesley. Give them a shout out. Because they not only gave $1 million to the African American Museum, but then gave $100,000 to Howard University to help those students who would not be able to graduate as seniors because they still had a debt to the university. Or had a college fair with 10,000 students to register as they were looking at HBCUs. This is the kind of language that we must begin to speak. Or a new birth, when his new pastor, Jamal Bryant, who decided to take up $65,000 to pay bail for those in jail for nonviolent offenses. That reintroduces the church to a new community. And so I end by saying, when we learn a new language, when we learn to speak in tongues, when we understand that fact can be spelled P-H-A-T and not F-A-T, when we begin to have a new understanding of those that we should love, then it doesn't matter so much who sits in that White House, because they will not determine our destiny. They simply will come and give their recalled ideas about who we are. But President 45 may be in the White House. The good news is God is still in the lighthouse. And because of that, we change our tactics, but keep our message and learn how to relate to this next generation. Amen.
Yeah, people, amen, go right on in there. Thank you, Bishop Proctor. This is how we're going to proceed. It's not in the order of which they seek. Next will be Stephanie Brown James, then she'll be followed by Dr. Yolanda Pierce, who is the Dean of the Howard School of Divinity. Somebody said the Howard School of Divinity got a woman as the Dean. Holler when you hear me. And then we're going to Bishop James B. Walker, who's sitting next to her, Reverend Don Tolliver, who is the Tallahassee NAN Vice President, and then Dr. Adolphus Lacey will close us out. Can you hear me? Say amen.
Thank you, Reverend Rivers. Good afternoon, everyone. This has been a powerful day, powerful, and I am excited to talk about a powerful initiative that my organization is working with the National Action Network on. Again, my name is Stephanie Brown James. I am the co-founder of the Collective PAC, which is the largest political organization in this country working to elect, fund, and support Black candidates running on the local, state, and federal level. We are an organization that in just 3 years have raised over $6.5 million to make sure that Black people have the chance they need to succeed at the polls, not just for their sake, but for the sake of our communities. Because we know when a Black person is on the ballot, Black folks come out to vote. And when a Black person gets elected into office, they will champion Black issues like no one else can. And so we are focused to make sure that we can empower our communities through those who are elected to represent us, and not just those who are placeholders. So I am excited that in 2018 we had one of the largest voter turnouts we've ever seen during the midterm elections. But let me tell you, the elections were not just a referendum on President Trump. It's a referendum on the state of affairs, the state of politics in this country. Because while we had a record number of Black folks come out to vote, the majority of whom came out to vote for Democrats. The problem in this country is that we still have representation that does not reflect our communities. Over 95% of all elected officials who are 95% of Republican elected officials are white. That is not surprising to anyone in this room, I'm sure. But 80% of all elected Democrats are also white. So while it is important that we support those who are working to support our communities, we have to also make sure that our kind and the ones that are going to champion our causes the most because they come from our communities are in a place to be successful. But how do we do that? We do that by making sure that we first do what we need to do and turn out to vote. But you can't turn out to vote if you ain't registered, right? It's estimated that there are over 70,000 Black churches in this country. And I think at least half are in Harlem. I wrote down the street like it's Black church, Black church, Black church. That's okay. We need God everywhere. Let's imagine that out of these 70,000 Black churches, at least the majority of them have 500 members. When you do the math, that accounts to over 37 million Black people within these 70,000 churches. Stay with me here. If we take 75% of those 37 million Black folks and make sure they are registered and turn out to vote, that is 28 million Black people who are voting. Now, there were only 120 million votes that were just passed in 2016. But let me tell you something. 3 states decided the election. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. 107,000 votes determined the election. So back up with me. If we can get 75% of those 37 million Black folks to be registered and turn out to vote, we close and eliminate any idea that a margin of 107,000 people in this country can decide who the next president is. We have the power to change our community. So I want you to take your phone and go to blackchurch75.org. This is a simple system that the collective in partnership with the National Action Network will utilize to help you, help your congregations to know who in the pews are registered to vote and who is not. Because this is about accountability. Let me hear you say accountability. If you go to church every Sunday with this Black person sitting next to you and then you know they ain't registered to vote, that's your problem. Because we have to be our brothers and sisters keepers in all things, especially in making sure that we are going to the polls. So we will, over the
Black college and university had been founded with the express purpose of doing two things: training teachers and training ministers. Morehouse was founded to train teachers and ministers. Spelman started off as a seminary. I'm here today as a representative of the Mecca, Howard University. HU. The reason that it's important to recount that history is because our HBCUs have always been involved in both head and heart, taking seriously the intellectual needs of our community, but grounded in the moral, ethical, and theological needs of our community. But today, unfortunately, there are only 6 accredited Black seminaries and divinity schools. 6 accredited. And I put that emphasis on accredited because accreditation matters, right? Now, I just want to say, I believe fundamentally that theological education is a training ground for our Black churches. It is important for our voter mobilization, but it is important that we always hold together the intellectual and the spiritual. You can get the learning and not forget the burning. The reason that theological education is so important is because if you have a grounding and a foundation in theological education, you'll be taught a liberatory framework, a liberatory theology, a framework for freedom and struggle of our people, and you will reject the theological malpractice that many of you are hearing far too often. You will reject a prosperity gospel that attempts to put the wealth in the hands of a few, and you will embrace a liberatory theology that insists I am because we are. If you have a liberatory theological education, you'll reject a doctrine of salvation. We call it soteriology. You'll reject a soteriology that emphasizes only one can be saved and you forget about everybody else. You can only have a salvation if in fact it is available and eligible for all. The theological malpractice that we see being emphasized by the religious right in this country and that we often see being embraced by some of our own people is an issue of ignorance, but it's also an issue of turning away from our foundation. We serve a God of abundance and not scarcity. And so many people are walking in a theological malpractice of scarcity where they don't think that there is enough, that they're willing to steal, kill, and rob, and destroy. But I'm here to tell you a theological education and grounding in the text and the history will have you to know our God is big enough. And so when we as churches, when we as people of faith, when we as mosques, when we as traditions that are rooted and grounded in the African diaspora take seriously this head and heart, we know that we have an ethical, moral obligation to do the work of justice. Faith calls you to engage in the political process because faith without works is dead. We have to be reminded of our common vision, of our common good. So I want to just remind you that the work that we have to do today to get our brothers and our sisters, our mamas and our aunties and our uncles and all of them to the polls, it is a work of both head and heart. You can tell them why their vote matters. You can tell them who they should in fact be looking at in terms of candidates. You can tell them what it means when you go into that voting booth and you pull that lecture. But you also have to remind them of the heart. You also have to remind them of our ancestors. You also have to remind them of a liberatory theological framework, because if you get free, and if God sets you free, you'll be free indeed. That's what you have to remind people of, because that is the power of your vote.
Thank you very much, and it is my pleasure to be before you all today, and I want to give a shout out to the members of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church who are with us on today. Amen. amen, that is seen. I want to talk to you today about connecting the dots between local and national elections. So I want to just give a brief spiel about the importance of what happens at the municipal level. Amen? Because we often talk about the national level, and we don't sometimes include enough about what should and can happen in local elections. Politically speaking, we live in a country where the states and territories elect 537 persons to serve in Washington, D.C. on the national level. Likewise, we owe it to ourselves to attend in granular fashion to our nationally elected officials. But the dots between that crowd of 527 persons in Washington, D.C. ought to be connected to the more than 520,000 locally elected officials. 527 in Washington, D.C., but 520,000 scattered across the United States of America. That 520,000 does not get as much press, but they are our judges. They are our sheriffs, our council persons, our mayors, the members of our school boards, and in some states, we even elect the dog catcher. Now this may sound a little bit comical, but last year, our locally elected government officials distributed over $1 trillion in these United States of America. Can somebody connect those dots? And in order, in my opinion, and I believe all of us, to be granted so great a trust, that group of 520,000 should be elected by the majority of the persons in their community. They should be. To distribute $1 trillion, you ought to represent somebody, but the truth is that many of these officials enjoy the enormous power of their office as given to them in many instances by less than 20% of the electorate. I'm saying that as an African American church predominantly, we can ill afford to be an either-or people regarding national and local elections, but we must solidly be a both-and people for the vulnerabilities that we have to deal with in our community suggest to us that we can't miss any of the balls that are thrown across the plate for us. Now, the federal government gets more press, and there is no level of government that more directly impacts our lives than that of local government. Sometimes local government makes us proud. Can anybody say sanctuary cities? The decriminalization of marijuana. And you might not like marijuana, but we ought to like the fact that our children in some locales don't have to go to jail because of it. Marriage equality. The Civil Rights Act, amen, was enacted nationally, but it was begun, it was fought for, it was marched for. Folks sat in at lunch counters for it on the local level. It was a local level that rose to national prominence. Even Black Lives Matter. What Black Lives Matter is fighting, they're fighting local issues, but they're doing it in a way that gives the local issues national attention. So sometimes the local government can make us proud. But there are other instances wherein the actions of our local government cause us true dismay. It is in the local government that we see the gentrifications of our neighborhoods. That's not hood that's gentrifying our neighborhoods. That's local government. Amen? And the reason why we want to vote is because we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to enjoy the communities that we built while we are young and when we get old. Can somebody say amen? The bathroom wars that took place, amen, in the Carolinas, those bathroom wars didn't come down from national politicians. That was the fight of local government, and we need to hold our governments accountable. And I'd like to say, let me go back to gentrification, and I'm going to close in a minute, but I need to go back to gentrification because not only in our communities, we used to deal with white flight in predominantly African American communities. And gentrification, amen, is another thing that we have dealt with in our communities. But now we're not just dealing with white flight, we're not just dealing with gentrification, but we're also dealing with secession. We're dealing with folk who decide that it's better because they understand the power of local government, that now they can succeed from a city because that city happens to have, come on somebody and say, what is it, Stockton, Georgia? Amen, because that city now has more black elected officials, so there are those who are saying, we're going to succeed from Stockton, and we're going to create a predominantly white, amen, Stockton, and a predominantly white Eagles Landing, because we recognize the importance of local government. Somebody say secession and help me out on today. All right, so let me just move on to my close. Local government is important. We need to understand that in our communities we have voting oases and we also have voting deserts. And voting deserts are those places wherein less than half of the average of the city turn out to vote. There is in the city of Columbia, South Carolina, a voting desert wherein less than half of the average of the city turn out to vote. My friends, primaries happen in the off years, and most elections in municipalities happen in the odd years, which I find fascinating because, my friends, it was 400 years ago in 1619, which is an odd year. Amen, it is an off year. And history reads that 20-some odd enslaved Africans were involuntarily immigrated to these shores called America. So, in an odd year, we were brought to this country. And I believe that in African American churches, we ought to make America remember 1619. We ought to make America remember the odd year by coming together as congregations, partnering together as congregations, and deciding that in the odd year, we're going to exercise our political power more than we ever have before to resurrect the memory of 1619 and to resurrect the memory of 20 odd African-American enslaved individuals. And I am a black preacher, so I give my final close. It has been said more than once that we need to deal with this whole idea of registration. We need to make it automatic. We need to make registration, deal with pre-registration in terms of voter registration, and all of the above is true. And I have a little story to tell you. Amen. I believe when Donna was running for president, that party was doing everything it could to confuse people about voting. Amen. Doing everything they could. They did such a good job that there were two persons, I believe, in the city of New York who didn't get registered for the Republican Party. One was named Eric, and the other was named Ivanka. They didn't get a chance to vote for their own daddy, amen, in the election because they made it so difficult to understand what the deadlines were. And I just want to say to you, we need to fight for these rights, because if Ivanka and her staff couldn't figure out when the deadlines were, if Eric and his staff couldn't figure out where the deadlines were, what do you think is going to happen to T-Bone and JoJo in our community? We need to connect the dots between local and national elections. God bless you.
Florida, which is Tallahassee, HBCUs do matter. I am a graduate, and my wife is a graduate of Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, which sits on the highest of 7 hills in Tallahassee, Florida. Founded in 1887 under the leadership now of Dr. Larry Robinson. Today, my topic is to deal with registration without demonstration is devastation. Registration without demonstration is devastation. Yes, I am a Black Baptist preacher. I'm sorry. We can register to vote, but if we don't go to the polls and demonstrate by voting, it's devastation of this current election. In the state of Florida alone, 3 million people registered to vote, but did not cast their vote. 3 million. Of that 3 million, 45% look like you and I. 45%. Now, the right to vote is one thing. Protecting the right to vote, increasing the vote, and mobilizing us to vote. But the problem is not getting registered to vote, but it's taking someone who's already registered to the poll. What have you done to take somebody to the poll? We as churches, we deal with the elderly. We go to community centers. We go to our neighborhood parks and recreation. But the individuals that are on the street who have registered, but when it's time to go to the poll, where are they? What are we doing? I cannot speak for what's happening across the country, but I do know that our elected officials have suffered from that. Our own Andrew Gillum in the state of Florida ran for the governorship. Got a call from a worker in the post office stated that over 52,000 ballots were sitting there and was not counted. Sent me a picture on my phone.
Hold on a second, one second. They got to go over there for me and for us. So I'm going to ask you to take another minute, and Dr. Lacey's going to close us out. He's got 3.
No problem.
And I ain't got none. So we'll be done with it.
Not a problem. In a nutshell, as I stated, what the hardship is, what we need to do as a people in a society, take 5 people to the polls with you. You don't go by yourself. You don't just take your family members. Find out somebody else who needs to go to the polls. Take them to go vote with you. You've already registered. Let's exercise our right to vote, because I will not be devastated with this election coming up in 2020. I know that I don't believe in a few things, but a few things I do believe in. Hebrews 11:1 says, now, as in the National Action Network, now, faith is something to think hope for, but evidence of things not seen. And I do know that I did read something from Martin Luther King. He said, lightning makes no noise. It does not make a sound until it hits. Let's strike at the polls on 2020.
My name is Jason, I'm pastor of Bethany Baptist Church in Brooklyn, New York. I feel like I just did a 7 last word ceremony. So let me just say, we got up early Sunday morning. I've been voting since 1988, and Reverend Jesse Jackson was certainly my first vote in the primary. I just want to just pivot for us to talk about this very, very quickly, think on this. What we want to do is to reimagine a culture of voting. Reimagine a culture of voting. And somehow we have got a romanticization that there's no reason to vote, or there has to be a reason. And what we want to understand is elections have consequences. The election of 1876 effectively ended Reconstruction with the Haynes-Tyndall Compromise. Black codes, Jim and Jane Crow, voter suppression. And also, the election of 2016 effectually ended everything we've been making progress for. And what's interesting about those statistics is 47% of white women voted for Donald Trump. Don't forget that. And 14% of black men voted for Donald Trump. Don't forget that. And if we believe that millennials stayed home, then who were the men that voted for Donald Trump? I believe they were pastors. I believe they were deacons and trustees in the church who reflected the patriarchy of authority that actually identifies with, 46 minus 1. And what we want to be able to do is we got to name that. But we also have the name social promotion, also known as incumbency. Once you get elected in our communities, you don't leave. Like when in our churches, you don't leave. There is a correlation that takes place. And so one of the things that we want to do is, the third thing, and I'll share, is that I'm pastor in Brooklyn, many of us here in New York City, we are in overpopulated cities that vote overwhelmingly Democratic. And the election is over after the primary. So then our numbers go down. And I'm so glad to pastor a historic church where we got state ministries. We got Mississippi, we got the Virginia ministry, and the Georgia ministry, and the South Carolina ministry. And what I tell them to do when we're voting in South Carolina, call everybody you know in South Carolina. Call everybody you know in Virginia. Call everybody you know down in Georgia. And as we try to create this culture of voting, then we recognize it was already said by all of those up on the panel, it's about down ballot voting. I vote every chance I get an opportunity to. It makes no difference. I vote over and over and over again. And what we wish to do, to be able to answer the challenge, I believe the church needs to not necessarily focus on millennials. You go crazy just focusing on millennials. What you want to be is intergenerational. It's both and. It's not either or. The church that has one or the other is not going to be a successful church. But to the extent that we have both of these, to be able to see what are the issues, because all elections are local. And once we find out what's going on in our communities, then we're better able to respond. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Dr. Lacey. Give all of our panelists a round of applause. We have another panel of black mayors coming right up. Ask you to stay where you are. Summarize is blackchurch75.org. Go to that website, and we want to make sure that every black church in the land will turn out 75% of those registered in their church so we can change everything come 2020. Give the panel another hand. We thank you for your attention. We thank you for your opportunity. Hold tight for the next panel.
Don't leave. We want to get started with our mayor's panel. Don't leave. You don't want to miss this. From jail to work. Next, all of our mayors will come. Turn it over. And don't forget, they have the concert tonight. Pastor Bishop Marvin Sapp will be here. You don't want to miss it. And Keith Wonderboy Johnson. Amen. Don't want to leave without some church. So I'm going to ask the